Good evening. Welcome to Jamie Russell Christian Middle Earth. I have a special guest with me, Pastor Kevin Morgan, and we are going to respond to some criticisms of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then we're going to talk about just theology and why we think some people may have ideas about what Adventism is. And we'll also maybe have some agreements with some of the criticisms because I don't think Adventism has been perfect historically. But let me bring in my guest, Pastor Kevin Morgan. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit and his channel. So welcome, Kevin.
Pastor hey, good to be with you, Jamie.
What you have a YouTube channel, and I'll post it. It'll be, and everybody should definitely subscribe if they watch this, especially if you have questions about Ellen White. I've seen Kevin's work be cited by scholarship in universities, and so he's written books on Ellen White. And I'll let him introduce his channel and what he's doing online and what his vocation is and what he's looking to do on here.
Very good. When I first started, I just had it under my name, and I was talking with my brother, who's a pastor in Arizona, and kind of tossed an idea back and forth. And he said, well, maybe you're helping people to consider Ellen White. So that's the name of the channel, Ellen White Reconsidered. And I think some people thought that it was going to be to transition people out of the church. But what I'm dealing with on that channel is some of the things that people have assumed are true. You know, they've heard it. It's been spread around on the internet. But whoever made the charge didn't dig as deep as they should have. And so I am inviting people who are at a point in their life that they're saying, you know, there's some good things from Ellen White. I'd like to reconsider some of those things. And so I deal with a variety of things, some with Adventist theology, some with Adventist history, direct issues about Ellen White, try to bring in occasionally like a human element, because I think people paint a caricature of her that doesn't really accord with some of the real stories about her. So I try to mix it up a little bit.
Cool. And I've directed people to your channel who have questions because, you know, I don't tend to want to tackle all her literature. I'm not as familiar with it as people like you. So I try to direct people to you if they have genuine questions. A lot of people don't have genuine questions, unfortunately, it seems like, and a lot of misinformation gets passed around. But that being said, we're gonna look at because I know you interact with Mike Colburn, and you've recently been blocked from his channel which seems crazy to me because of the way you conduct yourself. I think he just got upset, and that's fair or whatever. But so we're gonna in particular, Mike Colburn was born into an Adventist family, pastor's kid. Ryan Day was part of Amazing Facts,
right?
And he left Adventism, and they're discussing, their criticisms of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we're going to review some of that. But before we do, I was just going to ask you to pray for us.
Yeah, that's real important. So let's do that. Lord, you know how delicate human minds are, and how that people come to this subject from different sides of it, with pain from one side or pain from another, pain because of the way that people have treated them within the church, pain over issues of theology. And so I pray, Lord, that you would help us as we talk about these different subjects, that you'll touch our hearts and our words, and that we may be able to address some things that will be helpful to people, and that people don't feel like that they're being attacked, but that we're dealing with issues that are important to see from a positive light. And now, Lord, bless my friend Jamie as he leads out in our discussion and where it goes, that we may have your Spirit's direction and not just human thoughts. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Do you want to say anything regarding your interactions with either of these gentlemen before we look at anything specific, or should we just jump into it?
Well, Mike and I have not had a very agreeable relationship, because when I came on his channel, I thought I would do a little test run with him. You know, when you're going to use paint on something or dye something, you try to, do a little corner of it to make sure before you get it out there and know that it's going to work. And so if it's not going to work, you haven't messed the whole wall up, right? Or whatever it is that you're doing. And so I did a few little test things about some inconsequential stuff about dates, and because he had done a timeline, and I think that's a valid way to approach the subject, because he was talking about the development of ideas, and I thought that's a good thing. But my test was about a specific chronology and date thing. And since I have just recently published a book on Ellen White's early writings, I had been deep into, reconstructing and carefully bringing it out. And that's one of the things I've been known for. My book is peer reviewed with several Adventist historians. And so they knew that I was doing careful work. It's different than maybe some of the other historians. It's more of an annotation and collection of things to illustrate points, but it was careful work. And so I felt like I should at least be granted some credibility in it, and that it was a small thing. And so that was my little test case on the corner. And Mike would have nothing of it. And it was like, well, I got it from so-and-so, and it must be right because they're an Adventist historian, aren't they? And it's like, well, Adventist historians don't go to every deep level on everything. And I'm an editor. I'm, what's the word? Obsessive. That's the nice word for it. I'm obsessive about, little details and stuff. And so anyway, I just thought I'd try that, and he didn't like it very much. And he fought me over and over and over again, and I'd give him my evidence for it, and and that, and it didn't matter. He'd read a book, and he had a source that he felt comfortable with, and it was, I was just being irritating to him. And then we started getting into some other subjects that I was offering some information that put something in a different light. If you have two pieces of the puzzle, it may look like one thing, but if you have 6 pieces of the puzzle, you see something different. And so that I was trying to do that. And it wasn't the puzzle, it wasn't the picture that he had in mind. So he didn't like that too much. And then he started pumping out more and more videos. And I started getting a little frustrated, because he had a bunch of people come into his videos taking it as the truth when it was limited and therefore faulty. And I had other things going. I was editing books. He's got other things going too, I'm sure, but I couldn't keep up with the stuff that he was doing. And I started thinking about that old refrain that says, a lie can go halfway around the world while the truth is getting its shoes put on. And I felt like that, that I couldn't counter his information, because he kept cranking out, and apparently it had stuff in the chute. So he was able to put it all out. And I had to do original research to check his stuff. And because I do it at such a low level, original source level, it takes a lot of time to do stuff, you know? So
Yeah, that's just briefly. Before we jump into it, we're
yeah,
gonna. Somebody asked, "What are we doing?" We're gonna look at some claims of Brian Day and Mike Colburn, former Adventists. But like Jerry Gladstone, like when we start getting into like criticizing, they want to go shoot at the heart of the matter and undermine the whole movement, as if you got somebody interpreted something wrong regarding some nuance of
prophecy.
prophecy, the
Yeah.
evenings and mornings. And I've done a lot of research on that, but like it's hard to get people to watch it. And
Yeah.
it's like, if you're gonna anybody who starts saying something like the 2300 can't be years, for me at that point, I'm like it's some sort of Adventist, invention or something. When the people start saying we invented certain things, and then you show that it's a common interpretive method that's consistent, and they're like, yeah, but those people didn't believe everything. Yeah, well, we developed it and made it consistent, things like that, and they act like it just can't be true to try to undermine the whole movement, as if that would undermine all the obvious biblical truths that we believe anyways. But let's put that aside. Let's jump into what do you want to tackle first regarding
Well, so to finish the story,
yeah, oh sorry,
to finish that story, because I was thinking of that, I said, I wonder where that started. This is the researcher in me. I wonder who was the first one to say that. So I start, chasing it down on the internet, and you use the Internet Archive, archive.org, and other sources, to trace it down. And it came back to a quotation that was much, much longer. It wasn't as punchy as about the truth getting its shoes on, but it was talking about a liar can produce this before the truth can, whatever. And it was a little bit longer. And so I just put the quote up because this was my mistake. I put the quote up because I was feeling like I can't keep up with the quantity of stuff, and the people that are imbibing his stuff, of course, they're not going to want my stuff anyway, but I can't keep up. And so I put this up, and then I did a screenshot that showed the number of people that had watched his video, and then the number of people that had watched the response. And he outdistanced me by like 1,000 or something on that particular video. And I had maybe 100 or whatever. I don't know. But it was like, I was expressing the frustration that I couldn't keep up with what I considered to be misinformation. Now, you can also call them lies. That's not that I'm not saying that he's a liar. I'm saying that his information is not true, and therefore he is promoting something that is not true. But that doesn't make him a liar. But he grabbed a hold of that and said, "You're calling me a liar. I don't need to deal with people like you." And so I was blocked, and that was it.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with people so many times. It's like, that's a lie. You're calling me a liar? No, I'm saying you're just wrong. And so like when we talk, but people don't want to, it's the nature of YouTube.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's happened, but yet he comes on my channel and he advertises his stuff, and I'm happy for him to do that. I want people to think it through. And so if they go to his and they look at it and they look at mine, they can decide which makes more sense. But if they're on mine, they've already, been exposed to how I'm presenting it, so they can put that in the context of what he's saying. And so I'm happy with that. And that's where we have been communicating, is on my channel.
Kevin, that doesn't sound very culty of you.
It doesn't, yeah.
Advent's always called a cult, and I'm always like, I always tell people like a story real fast before we go into the first part. It's like, they never, when I was in high school, and I remember my Bible teacher like was like, we're gonna have people come in from other churches that disagree with us, and they like brought them in and let them
Mhm.
make their case. And I always like thought that was really cool. And I was like, that doesn't seem that cultish to me, that like they're trying to hide information. Like they're like, let the truth come out. Like let's look at what scripture says, and then you
Well,
decide for yourself.
well, you had a good teacher to do that. Apparently, listening to Mike describe it, he was kind of guarded from looking at any other thing. I took my oldest daughter to other churches with me. She liked to visit with me, and we'd go to other churches and meet people. And we got to a Baptist church that preached really whoa, 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 and she said, "Dad, why is he yelling at us?" And I said, "Well, in some churches, that means you really mean it." And oh, okay, and then I brought her with me when we were praying. We were in a group. There's a lady that was charismatic, and we were in a circle and praying. She's holding onto my hand, and the lady started getting into that fever pitch, and I knew, okay, you're on the runway, and you're about to, and I knew, off into the blue, and she had liftoff into her whatever language, and for her it was very meaningful. I could, but my daughter is like, "What is this, Dad?" And I
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
it's kind of on an emotional level that feels like an immediacy with God. She can't really tell you what she's saying, but it feels really intense and beautiful to her. And so she got exposed to that, our daughter, and it's like, that's no big deal. We're vegetarians. We went to a potluck it was a dinner that we were assured that there was food that we could eat. But when we got there, it was Hispanic. And my adventure daughter came with me, and they had chicken soup. And she looked at it, and she's like kind of scared. And I said, "Well, sweetie, have you ever had chicken?" She said, "No, Dad." I said, "Well, you want to try some?" She said, "Okay." So, it was like no big deal. I mean, because the choice to be a vegetarian is not like, oh, don't do that, that's horrible. It's like, this is a good choice in your life, and that's still her choice, for this point in her life. And I think that that's the soundest way. And I realized, I would try to give my reasons to my kids, but I realized that the choices that I made to become a vegan were my choices. My mom didn't tell me to do it. It was my choice. And in fact, my sister and I became vegans before my mom did, and she eventually did. So that was a choice. It's not that she was mindful of healthy stuff, but she didn't know, she wasn't exposed to everything we were exposed to. So I grew up with this kind of liberalism within conservatism, that you have to think, that you have to study and understand things. So that's the thing. So I realize that not everybody, this is addressing more of what you were asking me about. I realized that not everybody that was raised Adventist had that liberality to choose and to come to understand it themselves. That it was verboten, you know. And I'll have to say, I've become kind of a specialist on Ellen White, and at a certain point, um, when I was a kid, I was a little bit reticent about checking out these accusations that came out when I was a teenager. Okay. And I was like, you know, they could be right. I don't know if I want to do this. And and truthfully, as a small child growing up Adventist, I knew what they told me. I mean, I read the Bible because you have to do that for your Pathfinder honors and stuff. And as a young teenager, I really did want to read it. I had some very positive role models, young people who loved the Lord, and they brought information to us, and they brought some really penetrating questions that made me realize this is not just about knowing stuff. This is not just about being an Adventist. This is about having a real connection with God and talking to God. And one of them said, "Do you know Jesus?" And I was dumbfounded because I knew an awful lot about him, but I didn't know him. And I didn't understand, that transition from just knowledge to experience and communion with him. And so, in those early years, I started reading the New Testament in the Living New Testament paraphrase, and also read more standard translations at the same time. Had one teacher that encouraged us to do that, and so I came to understand not just about him, but to know him. And also at that same time, formative years for me, New Testament witnessing came around, which was a whole new thing about having assurance as an Adventist. That was a big deal, because Adventists had taken one little quotation that said that we shouldn't say that we are saved, and therefore, you're supposed to live constantly in this kind of doubting relationship with God, and that wasn't cool. And so, when they started, brought us one of the key passages, First John 5:13. I've written these things to you that you may know that you have eternal life. It's like, well, you can know that. And I shared that with some of my friends. They, "Oh, no, you're not supposed to know that you're saved." Well, it's not based on you. It's based on him. And he is there to get you through, And so,
yeah. And you see that issue within Adventism. So I think that is and can be and has been an issue within Adventism.
Oh yeah.
I just don't think that's I think that's a misapplication of like you said, a snippet of things Ellen White said, and like there is a context to talk that way, depending on what you're in a certain context, right? Like,
right.
If we're talking about mental assent, and I said the words one time, there is a sense where you shouldn't just say, "Well, I know I'm saved," because no matter what, like we wouldn't say that, or I wouldn't say that. But like you said, because of the Bible, that verse you quoted, we're supposed to be able to know. And I think Ellen White, if you look at a larger picture of Ellen White's work, she certainly believed that.
Yeah, I have a friend that wanted me to work on a manuscript she had, which I haven't, and she's passed away now, so that may not happen. But she had a number of passages on assurance in Ellen White's writings, and about that you can trust him, you can put your weight in him. Some of the things that she wrote, beautiful things that she wrote to her sister, her twin sister, about putting her trust in God. And and constantly she was talking about this. She used this concept of living faith. It's not just an assent, but it's trusting in him. And that was one of the things that I found in the Living New Testament, is that now, just as you have trust him to save you, trust him too with each day's problems. Live in vital union with him. And that's all of faith. Faith is a child who knows dad is there, who has that confidence. And it's not just a transactional thing. It's living. And so some of the complaints with Ellen White is because of a two-dimensional faith, when Ellen White's is a three-dimensional faith, and there are plenty of passages in the scriptures that talk about cleaning up your life, and that's not okay for a Christian. And maybe that's an assurance that people like today, who have obsessions with porn, or that that they just love certain kinds of things that are not necessarily good, but they want assurance anyway. And so that's helpful to them to have kind of a slam dunk security and it's all about him. So have you not given it to him? You know, that's the thing. And is he not going to hold you up to keep you while you're trying to put it in his hands, to let it go, to be honest with God? This is it's not just a transaction. Anyway, I know you've spent an awful lot of time on once saved, always saved with people, and you can unravel that a whole lot better than I can. You know, theologically, but that's the root of it, and it's a very visceral thing for people to know that God really does save them. And so they have boiled down the gospel to just the assurance of salvation no matter what. And then they consider that anything that Ellen White talks about, that Paul talks about, or that Peter talks about, or that Jesus talked about, is another gospel, which is kind of weird, you know, that it's boiled down to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ when he was preaching the gospel long before he told anybody about the cross. He hadn't even mentioned it to his disciples, but he was preaching the gospel of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people are very truncated about the gospel and wanting to like say, "Oh, you don't believe the true gospel." Well, you know, my kind of thinking is like, it's a huge subject, and but let's jump into the video.
Okay, sounds good.
Because and I'll just briefly comment. I'd like to know, does Mike Colburn and Ryan Day, because like it's one thing if you believe in once saved, always saved, like you're gonna have a problem with Adventism, but you're gonna have a problem with, I would say, historic Christianity. So like I'm not sure what they believe regarding that issue. They kind of, and a lot of their criticisms just seem like kind of, they don't come out and say that. But that's one question I would want answered by them. I'll just put
and they should be the one to answer it. I try to understand their view, and I think for Mike, he didn't realize that there are other systems of theology that were integrated, like the Adventist system is integrated, you know, around the sanctuary, and for others they integrate around some other idea. You could flesh that out, but they all are integrated in some way. Catholicism is integrated in some way. Now, some are less integrated. We would use the word systematic. Luther notoriously was not a systematic theologian. And so some of his stuff at one point in his preaching, he developed that didn't necessarily fit with everything else. People are totally shocked when I show from his teaching on Genesis what he said about the Sabbath. You've read some of that, haven't you? That I presented to somebody who had gone from Adventism to Lutheran church, and she said, "Oh, he didn't say that. He didn't write that." I said, "Yeah, I've got all of his writings on CD-ROM. Yeah, he did." So it doesn't quite fit with some of the stuff that he said, you know, to, what was his name? His former friend, but who accepted the Sabbath. He was, you know, he was Carl, what was it? Anyway, so it wasn't totally in agreement because he wasn't totally systematic. But generally, you know, there's this kind of a systematizing principle that everyone comes, and so he's kind of wowed with this new study, and he's had one of my former professors on. You mentioned Jerry Gladson, and Jerry Gladson was a professor at Southern when I attended there. I had a couple of classes with him, good classes. We had a class in Old Testament. We had a class pastoral ministry, and he was a good professor. He was kind and quiet. Told us some about his experience and how that he was a firebrand, you know, as a young person, which was hard to believe because he was very sedate and thoughtful and whatever by the time more like a monk. But in his early days, apparently he was gung-ho on Adventism and prophecy and did some preaching of crusades and stuff. And then he went to Vanderbilt to get one of his masters or his doctorate. And he discovered this new kind of thinking that had its own consistency to it, and that he decided he was going to listen to them. And of course, they're going to make sense within their system. And, and he shared that with us. And when we took Old Testament, we'd study a passage and he'd say, now use some conservative commentaries and use some liberal commentaries and present both of them, which was fine. But I felt like, but Adventists were people of the word, not people of the commentaries. And maybe they didn't know biblical languages, some of the early folks, but they compared scriptural concepts with scriptural concepts, which I think is it's a good way. How do you know what a word means? Context. The dictionary just pulls meaning out of how words are used. So it's so is the dictionary the authority of what words mean? No, words mean what they're used to mean.
How they're used.
Yeah.
The dictionary just records how the ways they're used throughout a lexicon.
So so Adventists have always been very strong about that. And so when you're talking about hell, you're talking about the second coming, you're talking about the Sabbath, they were penetrating in their study. And this is, there's another misunderstanding, and that is that Ellen White was the overseer of the development of our doctrines, and they really haven't read the Review and Heralds, the early Review and Heralds, where they bang it out and they bring out the positions and they show their proofs, and then you get Andrews, who comes in, who's linguistic, and he brings in the linguistics, and it's much more solid than they can imagine. So anyway,
I always tell, let's jump into it, but and that's a common misunderstanding. It's like they imagine it happened sort of like how Joseph Smith operated in Mormonism, and that's just so not. And like you said, if you just read a lot of what's recorded in the Review and Herald, the early thing, you see this. It's like, and I'll just ask him, like, which doctrine do you think Ellen White invented that all Adventists just accepted by Ellen White's authority? Like, what doctrine? And then it's just crickets.
Yeah. Well, I think the closest thing to anything that she had any influence on was the millennium, but she wasn't the originator of it, even that one.
Yeah. That's a really interesting subject too, because we have a very particular, I think that all actually, well, let's not get too sidetracked. I'd love to talk about that. Yeah,
for sure.
But that's a good one. But okay, so let's jump into the first one I gave you, I thought, let's start on something positive. So can we start at 5626? The one I didn't get 57. Hold on 1 second.
Oh dear. Okay. Out of all of them, that one's the one you didn't have. All right.
I got it. Okay.
You think you know David's story.
Oh. We get a commercial.
Adopt an appropriate understanding of where Ellen White's authority in writings stood in comparison to Scripture.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out, because there's a word there that's used, and that's verbal inspiration. Yeah. I'm not going to get into it on this. I plan on doing some future content on inspiration and, what does it mean for special revelation, general revelation, inerrancy of Scripture, sufficiency of Scripture, all that stuff. But it is interesting to note that at this conference is the key transition moment for the Adventist understanding of inspiration.
Mhm.
And most people don't realize that Adventists understand inspiration at its core, actually more the way I actually understand it.
Mhm.
But they made a transition from Protestant understanding of
Yes.
inspiration because, and this is me inserting a little bit of my interpretive lens and position on it.
Sure.
My assumption is that because of how they view Ellen White as being inspired, because they transitioned to a model of inspiration, or I should say it this way, they confirmed a
Mhm.
model of inspiration moving forward, that instead of the text being what's inspired,
Mhm.
it's the author and God behind it. It's the duality of inspiration, which I actually think does, this is just a personal aside, I actually think that does line up more with what biblical text is.
Mhm.
But I think they had to make that transition to include Ellen White in, oh, well, she's inspired too. It's the author, not the words, it's the author that's inspired, because that gets them potentially off the hook with every little word being exactly what it's supposed to be. And that
Okay. Well, what do you make
Oh.
of that?
being exactly what
Sorry. Yeah. So that's a common criticism. I would just say that's how Ellen White just described it. My understanding, and I'm open to changing my mind about this, but maybe I'm a little biased. I would just say, well, that's what she presented, how it worked. And I do think a lot of Adventists, historically, anyways, and even still today, have more of a sort of a less sophisticated understanding of verbal, of verbal inspiration. And I think Ellen White,
Right.
because when I came back to Adventism like 10 years ago, I was listening to like some other scholars outside of the church because I was kind of wanting to just see what other people said too, right? And so I listened to
Right.
one scholar named Dr. Michael Heiser, and he made a case to why. And then I found out later that because I had more of an inspirational idea that was a little less defensible, sort of a word for word sort of thing, right? Like he was describing. And I
Mhm.
listened to Heiser, and I found his that you can't really defend how the text came down to us and how it should be understood, and the translational issues and things like that. And I realized, man, that's indefensible.
Right.
And I was kind of thinking I had been taught from Adventism the less sophisticated thing. Then I found out it's not actually what like Ellen White suggested or what's even, but it turns out what she said is really the only defensible position on how to understand inspiration. That's my understanding. I don't know what's your take on that?
I think he's not 100% in agreement with us, but he said that he sees it more like that, and I appreciate that because when I've trying to study out how she was putting things together, kind of forced us to look at the Bible and see how it was put together. So he may be actually right in saying that she helped us to look at the Bible and see it again, but it really is, like you say, the most defensible position, because when you start looking at Luke, when Luke puts together his gospel, he puts it together, not being an eyewitness, not getting visions about what happened. He goes to eyewitnesses and takes their accounts and brings it together, so that's a different idea than those who think, all right, God said, all right, take this down, and then we start looking at the book of Revelation when he has visions, but God doesn't say, all right, take this down. He says, write what you have seen. So
Yeah, and
again, and we keep looking at different.
Yeah, he used John. Like if you you look at textual criticism, or you look at manuscript discrepancies, it's not really a problem unless you think there's like some preferred perfect English translation, which is like not defensible when you look at just how translation works, first off. So I would argue that, yeah, like when you actually get into it and you're honest with it, and it's not to undermine the text, but it's just to say, like, this is just how translation works, and this is how the writers describe their process of recording what's considered God breathed in the text. And so you can say, oh, they had to do that, but that's I don't think she was saying those things in some sort of context of trying to defend some errors she made or something. I think she's just talking about like an insight on how it actually worked when you actually get into the text and look at what they say.
Yeah. And you know, I think we have very simplistic ideas about it. And I'm sure that I had some of them at some point. I don't know, because I've gradually dealt with this. You know, from the time I was a teenager, my mom gave me a book that was on problems in Bible translation or something like that. That was by the BRI of that time. And I said, I don't want problems. I want solutions. But, you know, I looked into the book, and even gradually I began to realize that there are textual issues and whatever. And I've simplistically said it this way. If I said, he don't know what he's talking about, would you still understand what I said, even though I said it in non-standard English? You know, if I leave out periods and stuff in my texting, you know, which a lot of people do in texting, you know, I mean, punctuation, capitalization, whatever, some of that's going to be fixed automatically, although it sometimes is a little overzealous. But, you know, people don't care. You know, you get through, and then you get somebody like me, and I make one mistake, and then after I've written the post, I'll put the correct word, two words together, so that you know that I knew what I should have done. You know, but most people don't care, because it's not required. And so if there are a few little grammatical issues in Revelation, or there were punctuation issues at some point or whatever. I mean, because they didn't have punctuation the same as we have today, or even of the 16th century, you know, whatever.
Yeah. There's just, we know, like when you look at in the Old Testament, you see this too. It's like first person, and just like suddenly out of nowhere, it's like not first person anymore. And it looks like somebody, you know, was editing it and didn't care to like adjust the
voice.
The voice. And so it's like, and it's not, you know,
it's not a problem. It's not a problem. Yeah. Okay. So so I think we were in agreement on that, which is a good place to start, because we do actually have some agreement. There's one little correction that I would make, because he was suggesting, and I don't know that he's been a great scholar on it, but it's his observation that this came about in 1919 at the 1919 Bible Conference. But if you can pop up on the screen what I'm sharing, right on my screen, right here. This is from the Review and Herald in November 1883, just so you got some context. And right here in this passage, it says, "We believe the light given by God to his servants is by the enlightenment of the mind, thus imparting the thoughts, and not, except in rare cases, the very words in which the ideas should be expressed. Therefore," and then they made certain
36
actions.
years before 1919.
Yeah. So just a minor issue. Now, this is the kind of punctiliousness and stuff that as an editor, I do. All right. And so it's I would, and it might be irritating to a certain kind of personality. All right. My brother would be.
important because that's not in some response to criticisms of her. And then turns out that's just like actually the only defensible position according to modern scholarship too, I would argue.
So
And-
there's some value to seeing the chronology. All right. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say on that. But I think we're ultimately in pretty good agreement on thought inspiration. All right. Now let's go to 1627. 1627. And he's going to talk about
things acting funny here. 1 second.
Okay. He's talking about core beliefs.
Okay.
Should be one of the first one. Oh, you went in reverse order. All right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But sorry, I don't know what I did there. It's acting funny, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, sorry, I don't know what I did there.
I will assure you, folks, we tried to work this out ahead of time. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what I did there.
I will. Okay. You need the.
Fuck these needles. Stab yourself in the stomach every week and you'll see the fat melt away along with.
Is. But
Okay.
I think they had to make that transition to include Ellen White in. Oh, well, she's inspired too. It's the author.
Okay, that's where we were. All right. So now we want to click on 16.
Suddenly some of my things are missing now. So I'll just have to find it. The 16.
Okay,
what?
go to 1627.
I think I don't know. They could be just.
Yeah, stuff disappears.
Yeah.
It's like that extra sock.
Okay, it might be a little early, but here we go.
The
Yeah,
solution to like what Ty is saying
Mhm.
is, you know what? None of them are fundamentals.
Okay.
Which is
He's talking about fundamental
is
beliefs,
so-
and Ty Gibson was saying to have the truth is not to have propositional truths from the Bible that you can back up from the Bible, but it's to have Jesus. And that's Ty's point. I don't think he would dismiss the work that you do, in trying to understand from Scripture what is the truth about death, what is the truth about hell, what is the truth about salvation, and all of those things. All of those things are true, but he's saying outside of a relationship with Christ, what are you left with? And he was making that point. But anyway, that's what he's addressing here. Go ahead.
how would you even have a Christian group if someone came in, for example, and said, I don't believe that I'm saved through Jesus Christ. I don't believe that I don't believe the Trinity is, and whether or not someone does or doesn't, like the Trinity is a fundamentally Christian, it is an Orthodox core Christian teaching. So if you aren't Trinitarian, then you're at least heterodox to Orthodox Christianity. And yet here you've got a guy saying, nah, you can still worship with us. Just, it doesn't really matter, which is totally contrary to the system of Adventism, which you have to accept it all.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's, I didn't set that up totally right for this one because what he was responding to is, an editorial from Adventist Today that was suggesting that we have a 29th fundamental belief that says you don't have to believe any of the others. Because Lauren was saying that we just want people to come together and worship with us, and they don't have to subscribe to any of those things. And he's pushing back. Mike is pushing back against that. He's saying within Christianity, we do have some core beliefs. The problem that Mike has is that the core beliefs that he has are exclusive of some of the core beliefs of Adventists.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting issue within Christianity, period. Like, the people call them primary and secondary issues, and that obviously makes sense. I would just say that's why Adventists, I think, and I'm not super knowledgeable about this, but my kind of thinking is like, we don't have like a creed. We just have like this is sort of just like a statement about what it means, what Adventists, believe. Like, and so like
an expanding list of beliefs.
Right. And so, people have asked, what if you don't believe Ellen White's a prophet, but you believe all the other fundamental beliefs or something? Like, how would you respond to that? Would you kick them out of the church? And people have different answers for that. I would just say, like, this is just a good statement about what Adventists believe and about our theology. And so like, depending on like what issue you're dealing with in the context, it's like, obviously Ty Gibson doesn't think it doesn't matter what you believe, or the Adventists don't have core beliefs or something, or particular beliefs, but he's saying like those things aren't like the primary issue if you don't have a relationship with Christ, if you're not converted.
Exactly.
So like, that's his point. And now he's like, I don't know what it seems like that's something that most Adventist critics would like be saying, we don't like. Ty Gibson's expressing something that people accuse Adventists of not caring about. And so it's I don't even know why he's criticizing it, to be honest.
Well, I think in that case, he's agreeing with him. But what he's saying,
right.
Yeah, but because Ty didn't add on, there are other, there are beliefs that have to do with Jesus, or that extend from him. Ellen White had an expression. She said, "The truth as it is in Jesus." And so every one of our beliefs should enlighten us about some aspect of who Christ is. Just like, your defense of hell really has major implications about how we see Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not just, having the right belief in the can. Excuse me. All right, buddy, come on in. My little doggy's going to be out there fussing until I let him in. So it's not just having a belief statically. It's how does that make approaching Christ help you? And I have commented on this fact. If you don't care if somebody from Pakistan was burned alive, I have some questions about your humanity. Even though he's not of your tribe, he's not of your country, he may not even be a Christian, but if you can't, if your human empathy doesn't kick in and say, that's a horrible thing, for one human to push that on another person and burn that person alive, and make that extension. So you've got a God who doesn't let somebody even die from the burning, but keeps it going for an eternity. What does that say about the loving, gentle Jesus? Right?
Yeah. It's like, but so is somebody, it's like everybody's always thinking about, well, if you don't believe that, right, does that mean you're going to hell or you're not saved? And it's like, no, but like, how does that affect how you think about yourself and God and other people? I would argue, right? So, like, obviously it matters,
right?
But if you mean, does it matter? Like, I'm condemning you because you don't believe it, right? Right. That's like the whole push and pull of like theology in my mind. Is like, I don't really want to say anybody's lost or for sure because they don't affirm a proposition.
Right.
Talk about how it affects how you think about other people and God. I think that is probably important, I suppose.
Yeah. And truly, if you understand God as Kirk Cameron is now, coming to understand, it is a really liberating thing, to think about that. I mean, I asked a good friend, this is a lady that we had relationships with. She was part of our co-op. We had natural foods co-op in one town, and we got to know her through that. And I had a conversation with her about hell because of her background. And I was just trying to ask some questions. And I know this is troubling to people, and this is not our main subject for tonight, but it's both interesting to both of us. But I said to her, what if your sister is the one who's burning in hell, for whatever choice that she made, and God decided she goes to hell. How would you feel about that? And her response was, I guess God will just have to harden my heart.
Oh, that's swallowing hard there. Interesting. Yikes.
Yeah. So anyway, we can take any of our teachings and then say, how does this relate to Christ? How does it help us to see him better and in focus? I'm in my prayer meeting. I have a bilingual church. I have English and Spanish. Yo hablo español. So I have a Spanish prayer meeting, and in our Spanish prayer meeting, we're talking about the 10 Commandments and how the 10 Commandments help us to understand about God. What are his values? And so thou shalt not kill is not just about avoiding, killing somebody in the process of your day. You may think about it 100 times, but just don't do it. No, it's about how do you value life and how much does he value life? And one of them, it's kind of a dialogue. So I say, give me your verses that have to do with it. And one of the ones they brought up was the thief cometh not but to steal and to kill and to destroy, but I am come that they might have life and may have it more abundantly. So thou shalt not kill is about a God who wants us to have abundant life. He values life in the fullest. And so every teaching that we have reflects on who he is. It's not just a static belief that you hold and that you can check off with a mark.
Right.
So I think he gets part of that. But I'm not sure if he understands the value of our beliefs. And you do, because when you took a hiatus and came back and studied it, you saw how it made good sense.
Yeah, exactly. Someone's asking, I think maybe I'll do another show on this or something. We could talk about this. I think this person doesn't hold penal substitution, but they're very much an Adventist. I don't think the Orthodox has an official eschatological view, but a lot of them, some are premillennial, but I think a lot of them take like Augustine's view and are against. I've just heard different things from different ones. That's all I could say about that. Okay, what about, should we go back to this?
That was about as much as I had on that one. I got another one to go to if you want to.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, I'm going down my list, and some of them are not as essential as others. They're, nitpicky a little bit. But this one I think has got a valuable point, 3937.
Okay. Yeah, let's do this one and then maybe do a part 2.
Okay.
And maybe let's see if anybody wants to ask any questions after we do this one.
Yeah, that's healthy.
39 what?
3937.
Okay.
Another way to, okay, go ahead.
I got it.
Who's coming in the driveway?
Oh, I love this commercial, but yeah.
My daughter is being treated for leukemia. I hope that she lives.
What a sweetie.
Adjustment that I am.
Yeah, I love the videos where little daughters go into their dads. It's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Able to make. Now, notice what he says here. He says, the way your mother's writings have been handled and the false impression concerning them, which is still fostered among the people, have brought great perplexity and trial to me. It seems to me that what amounts to deception, though probably not intentional, has been practiced in making some of her books, and that no serious effort has been made to disabuse the minds of the people of what was known to be their wrong view concerning her writings. But it is no use to go into these matters. I noticed I have talked with you for years about them, but it brings no change. I think, however, that we are drifting toward a crisis which will come sooner or later, and perhaps sooner. A very strong feeling of reaction has already set in. And my friends, this was just a few months before Ellen White passed. She was still alive. She was just quickly drifting into her soon death. Her health was failing her. But this scholar, W.W. Prescott, is talking about an issue that not just himself, but others had expressed concern about in relation to Ellen White's writings. The errors, the inconsistencies, the way the people had been basically educated to view her. He said, this is not right. This is wrong. I've talked to you, Willie, about this on multiple occasions, but nothing has ever been done. Nothing has ever been done to correct this. And he says there in the latter part of that letter, as we just read, that, and I think it's spot on. He says, I believe that we are headed into a crisis, probably sooner than later, that more or less it's not going to be good. And so now fast forward, Ellen White dies a few months after he wrote this letter. 4 years after she dies, and by the way, most Adventists are not even aware of this, but there was a Bible conference held in 1919. Now, if you have not done your research on the 1919 Bible conference, have mercy. I didn't know this for years. I'm going to tell you, having been a Seventh-day Adventist minister, very well known for the most part of a lot of different Adventist history, very familiar with the bulk of Ellen White's writings. I didn't even know about this 1919 Bible conference until about 3 years ago.
Well, it was not something that was known.
Okay.
You must have watched the George Knight presentation.
Yeah, George Knight and Michael Campbell's dealt with it, and they give some. They bow to Michael's book on 1919 Bible Conference, and there's some historical context that both of those historians have brought to it. But what he mentioned, and the key words that I wanted to draw to, he has read into the statement of Prescott about errors and inconsistencies. And I've read the 1919 Bible Conference notes. I read it once, just sitting and reading, and then I turned it into an audio format so I could listen to it and go out for a walk and whatever, and my mind could focus on it. And it's not as presented. They are having a candid discussion about what are the limits, what is the value of Ellen White's writings in relationship to biblical interpretation and historical accuracy. And so it's a candid conversation. In part, they kind of missed the mark on this when they were setting it up. They were saying that this was part of the main conference, and then they kind of, I think they backpedaled a little bit, so they pretty much got it right by the end, that this was just kind of an off-the-cuff discussion that wasn't part of the scheduled conference. So this was teachers and ministers, nothing nefarious about it. It had been an ongoing education kind of seminar that ministers and pastors would be there. They, you wouldn't necessarily invite all of the membership to travel to Tacoma Park for the thing. So there's nothing nefarious about it or exclusionary. It's just, this was an in-house workers meeting that dealt with history, used it in history, and so on. And it's true that Ellen White had passed away 4 years before, actually not because of poor health. I mean, she did have some declining health, but she broke her hip, so she died because of that. But anyway, it was 4 years.
When you read that statement by itself, the first thing that jumps out at me, having dealt with issues of seeing people give no context and pull out statements, I'm just thinking, like, this could be something very particular in a very particular circumstance. Like, even that needs context.
Mhm.
Clearly, I mean, not just in a defensive sense. I'm just saying, like, you get like a quote like that needs context. I mean, but sorry,
Right.
keep going.
And what we're getting is we're listening in on one side of a phone conversation. So you're having to kind of fill in, and part of that is, do you know the other person on the other side? So if you did know the other side and you heard, even though you could only hear one side of it, you could fill in more. But at the 1919 Bible Conference, they brought up two key things, and it did have to do with, let's see, I put a note in here about this. There it is. It's not, I didn't send it to you. So let me pull up my notes. Infallibility and yeah, but it has to do with the concept of infallibility. I don't know that any Adventist today would consider Ellen White infallible as a human being, but there was an idea that had to do with this verbal concept of inspiration. That's what it is. It's the infallibility and inspiration, those two key things. And those were the things they were grappling with. And Willie and Elder Daniels did not have a verbal inspiration view, although there were some people who did and were really bent out of shape by that discussion. But Prescott, who he was quoting there, who he's reading from, had been involved in reviewing the first chapter of The Desire of Ages. I have a whole chapter, a whole paper on that chapter on academia.edu. Anybody can read it. It's kind of neat. To me, it's interesting as an editor, writer, researcher, the process that it went through. My assumption of Ellen White's writing prior to any of this study that came out in the 70s and 80s was that, like I thought anybody did, if you write a book, you sit down with a pad and paper and you start with the beginning, fill in your first chapter, turn the page, do the next until you write all the way through, and however long it takes you to write like that. It wasn't done like that. Desire of Ages was a rewrite of a rewrite with multiple pieces that came together and were gathered and arranged by Marion Davis of Ellen White's own writing. And
Wait,
when
are you
I
saying-
put stuff together,
are you saying that she didn't put her head in a hat and then each letter came down on a pillow from heaven and then she just recorded it? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, well, I they got this picture of her. I could picture her sitting in her chair and just, starting from scratch. But I have, I've worked with Marion Davis's letters, she and her back and forth with the Pacific Press, how that it originally it was going to be two separate books. Why? Well, because it had been two separate books, Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 2 and Volume 3. So they figured, well, they would divide it up in two different ways. And eventually they said, well, let's put it together. And they had different names. It's a whole process till they come up with the very best thing. And, some people like to look at the earlier stuff because of certain kind of interest in it. I think it's interesting to look at the manuscripts, but it's like, listening to the scratch songs of the Beatles that they never produced. They're not as good as the ones that they, finally produced, right?
They got produced and
yeah. I mean, there's a reason why it's a scrap,
you mean Ellen,
but
are you saying Ellen White had notes and then she changed phrases when she thought they sounded better a certain way? I mean,
well, yeah. And
how the
Marion,
Bible, that's just how writing works.
That's how writing works.
People have this you're trying to reduce the Bible's inspiration to make it fit Ellen White. No, the reality is when you look at what we know about manuscripts and texts and what's in the text itself as we have it.
Mhm.
Like there's evidence that there's editing in the Bible too, maybe and likely, like did Moses write the Torah? And it's like, yes, this is my view. You can disagree or whatever, but when you look at the
Structure.
there's a good chance that later, priests, edited it. Like, but Moses is the author. Like he put it together, but like, Moses didn't write
Refined
about
it
it
in some way,
after
maybe?
he died. Somebody else had to write that.
Right. So at least that much had to be a postscript, for sure. Yeah.
And that's not a problem for it.
Yeah, so-
it doesn't mean the Bible's not inspired. It doesn't believe the person isn't inspired. It doesn't mean they're not the author. It just means that people have this kind of stilted or this sort of idealistic notion in
Simplistic.
their head.
Yeah.
Simplistic that like,
Yeah.
and it's just not defensible, and it doesn't need to be defended that way. Sorry, I'm passionate about this
Right.
sort of thing.
Yeah. And so the crisis that was going to come is the clash between the view of verbal inspiration and thought inspiration. And Daniel's got canceled in part because of that issue. It's like the sticklers for the verbal side said, no, this guy is off track. And they apparently didn't read, what had been written in 1883. And so it wasn't a new thing. It's just that they didn't conceive of it properly. And I think there's a number of things that, if you have a notion about something and then you get more information, you should be able to adjust your concept. And I think some people don't like that. It's not convenient.
It's scary.
To them. It's scary, right? And
You know
it
what?
feels
This was giving me flashbacks because when I was coming back, like I was telling you earlier, I was like, because I had that idea
Mhm.
because I'd heard it from other pastors and my kind of my idealistic view about the scripture, and it's like the reality is, it's still 100% inspired, but we don't have to
Amen.
think about it in such a silly way. And I think the criticism and the reality is that like that is just how. Whatever you think about Ellen White, she got that right about how it works and how she was describing herself. It's really not. The only thing that had to be fixed was that some people in the church had that simplistic view. And I would argue, as I have many years ago when I first started my channel talking, this is one of the subjects I actually talked about.
Okay.
And it's really freeing when you realize you don't have to defend something that's indefensible.
Great. Yeah.
And it's freeing, but it's scary for a lot of people.
Yeah. And now this is a little side issue on the subject of inspiration and how she described it. She understood how it worked, and obviously in 1883, the people that wrote this preamble to the what they were doing was a revision of the testimonies, carefully looking at different words to make sure that it was as clear as possible. The first time you write something is not necessarily the clearest. It does give you certain light, but it isn't necessarily the clearest. When I write something, now I go for a walk and I dictate it because I just need to get the overview, and then I come home and dump it onto my computer and fix it up, from there. And sometimes I'll find.
Do you run it
Pardon?
through AI? Sorry.
Actually, I started doing that, not to change the words, but to punctuate it, because
to get
when
better maybe get better grammar, and then you're able to review that anyways. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
no, it's a tool. I mean, I've used Grammarly for years, and it catches things that sometimes I don't see. I'll give you my biggest thing. This is on editing. It's listen to it. If it doesn't make sense when you listen to it, there's something not right, but part of that is the punctuation, because if it doesn't pause when you think it should pause, something's missing, right? So anyway, you get it down. That's the important thing. is to just first get it down. You can fix it after that. You can improve the wording and so on. And so that's part of the process. I think that Paul's writing is kind of stream of consciousness, because he goes from one subject and like you would want him to keep on the subject. And he said, oh, and by the way,
have you read 1 Corinthians 15? Like the longest run-on sentence you can imagine.
Yeah. So he's just and his mind shifts from one subject to another, and it kind of flows. And by the way, he's thinking about this, so I might as well write it, and it's in there. And so sometimes it's confusing to people who think a different way. And if you've been a writer, like a journalist, you're supposed to state your big idea, right up front, and then support it, and he doesn't always do that, so it's a different way of thinking and writing. And each of the Bible writers writes in a different way. Anyway, what I was going to say is that even with that concept in 1883, she was looking for a good way to express it. And one day she came across a book that the guy had it pretty good, but his bottom line was different from hers, about inspiration not being the thoughts, not being the words of man. And he says, and not even the thoughts. She didn't buy that, but she took his statement and said, yeah, he's getting there, but let me bump it, shape it, and texturize it. And she did that in a notebook. So it wasn't published until like 1943 or something. I tracked it down. The first that most of us know about it is in the Ellen White and Her Critics, Nicole's book. But it was published before that. And it was in a ministry article before that book. So somebody discovered it as a manuscript and said, wow, she said this really well. Now, it's very similar to the way she described it in the Introduction to Great Controversy. So it's not like it was a brand new thought to her. She wrote that back in 1888. So she had the concept, but she found this guy who said it well. And so then she used that in her notebook, and it wasn't even published during her lifetime. But we find this little gem because she said, hey, this is good, And so people that want to complain about her using gems, it's like, no, she found somebody who said it well. And, it's like I took your video and put it on my channel because you said it so well. I said, like, there's nothing more to say on this, man, and I hope it was okay with you. But, yeah. So it's like, and in his case, it wasn't 100% correct. She had to correct it. She had to clean it up, but it got in the right direction. And so that's on this subject of inspiration and on the process of writing. And what these guys do is assume that they're saying she had a lot of errors. What was the word that they used? Errors and inconsistencies. And I don't find that as much as they do. It's not that language can always be more precise. I've had this little run-in with Mike over something that he misunderstood, and today we've been working on it. And I've been, putting out statements and explaining it. And then somebody responded to one of my explanations and said, yeah, we got to be careful about what we say. And so she said, because really, like they say on that book, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. You familiar with that book? Yeah. And I said, well, as one from Mars, I think what you're saying is correct. And then I paused after that. And in parentheses, I said, just in case somebody might think that I really think I live on Mars, that's an expression that's borrowed from the title of this book. And the concept of that book is that men and women think differently. And by that, I mean that men can compartmentalize more, and for women, things are all related. But let me clarify that
That's not
this is a
always-
generalization.
Generalization is not always the case.
And so I go from this one statement that should be generally understood, but maybe somebody won't. So I have to comment on it to define. It's like, ad ridiculum, it's just, and so language is always like that. And somebody said, well, you should be more mindful about how somebody's going to take what you say. And I say, and in particular about Ellen White, she should have been more mindful of what somebody 150 years later was going to assume from what she said when they read it in their modern context that awards people with participation trophies and never corrects people too much. So it's like,
Yeah. And next time, I think I'd like to focus in on that before I close it down. I would just say, I think I'm going to give a closing statement. I'll let you give yours. I'll say, I think you have to be charitable when you're criticizing. Otherwise, a lot of people will eat that up because they just want sound bites that just shows, Adventism is wrong. And I think, if you understand how context works, you understand how language and translation works, is what people should say if they have a mature understanding, is that Ellen White happened to just get this. Ellen happened to be right. And I think Ryan Day was getting a little conspiratorial there and filling in, it was wishful thinking. That's kind of my view is what I'd say about it. But I would like, and they'll use that. Like the example you gave. She was, that's like a claim of plagiarism. And I find in my experience, when I look at these criticisms that are often regurgitated or focused on, these same criticisms that they level at Ellen White, I always find, these criticisms would have to then be leveled at Scripture in the same way.
Not going to do that.
But you wouldn't want to be, so like all these criticisms would have to also be leveled at Scripture when inspiration and things like that are actually understood in a better way or a more defensible way. I think there's all sorts of views about inspiration and borrowing and things like that. But when you actually look at the only defensible view, a lot of these criticisms that are leveled at her would have to be leveled at the biblical writer. And we can get into that more next time, but I find that that's the case and I can support that, but I'll leave it with that and let you give your final words. And we will continue. We have some more clips that we want to go over. I just have to end it tonight. So I'll let you, thanks for joining me, Kevin. And I'll definitely put your channel in here and people should check it out and subscribe, especially if they have questions about Ellen White, considering all the work you've done and being a meticulous scholar on these issues. So thanks for joining me, and I'll let you have the last word before I close it down.
Well, it's been good to join you for this blocked party as we consider, what is it? And in understanding people, I try very hard to be compassionate and understanding. My nature is to debate. I am a debater. I wouldn't do it at all. My wife says, I don't like doing that at all. I don't like conflict, but it doesn't bother me, but I like to do it with a charitable spirit. And I don't want to lose people because I have said something harsh, and I don't want that to be the case. But at the same time, when I have made an observation, it's not a facile, superficial observation. I have put a lot of thought and care into the research of it. And as one of my friends, a historian, Kevin Burton, has said, Kevin, your books are unreadable. which by that he means they are so documented that they're not meant to be read just straight through like a storybook. I tried to fix that a little bit on this last book. But I give you, I don't say, take my word for it, as most historians do. They'll make pronouncements and they'll give you a vague little reference. And you look it up and sometimes you don't find a source for what they're saying. I give you a quotation. I give you references. I give that opportunity, and I want to give people the opportunity to see things again in a more holistic way. And so I invite you to join with me on that journey of getting to know Ellen White as a person, as a Christian whose greatest desire as a young person was to tell the story of Jesus' love, and to see her in that light, and not as that old lady who wagged her finger at us and told us we couldn't play checkers. I mean, that's just kind of a stilted view of her. And yeah, she did have some very firm ideas, and that we may not follow today. We are more liberal about it than that. But that's not the measure of who she was. And I invite you to join me to see her in a different light.